Alright, so what I'm going to be reacting to today is the Ghibli AI disaster. So, for context, with the whole ChatGPT, I think it was a 4.0 update that, for whatever reason, allowed people to make things in the style of Studio Ghibli, and that was a pretty hot trend for at least a day, maybe longer. But this came out 2 weeks ago, and I'm guessing it's going to kind of get into the whole, is the best way to say it, implications of AI art. I mean, this is probably a topic that's been discussed at a fair bit of length for maybe some degree of time. But anyway, we're going to give this a react. Or I'm going to give this a react.
いうのが出てきて、そうすると例えば水彩画みたいなものをCG で人間が描いてるように表現するっていうことっていうのが多分5年後とか10年後ぐらいには少なくともきっとできるだろうっていう。
He was pretty good on that time frame prediction, because 2016, 5 to 10 years from then. I mean, we're looking at right now, and it's like it's in the range. The memes and stuff.
So OpenAI has made this Ghibli-fying thing, some image-generating monstrosity that turns your photos into something that vaguely looks like Studio Ghibli. Wow, it's so magical. I'm sure they got permission to be using their brand association for this promo campaign for their slop. I'm sure that absolutely happened. And this is...
So right away you could kind of tell this guy's sort of slant on it, because I would say that this is a fairly, to some degree, a commonly held vibe by a lot of people that are more of an artistic persuasion. I don't know if this guy's an artist, but he is speaking as if he may be one who is an artist, who maybe is protective of fellow artists and artistry. Probably fairly understandably so, because to have all this effort and time put in to just have an AI kind of, snatch it, might kind of feel like you've been done dirty by the AI,
This has been divisive, especially in Japan with anime. I'm sure that absolutely happened. And this has been divisive, especially in Japan with anime directors saying it was complete disrespect to do that to Miyazaki. Most likely through, stealing every frame from Studio Ghibli's films. But it has been quite popular with the general population who see it basically like, oh, it's cool, it's like a TikTok filter, which, yeah, it's pretty close. Basically works the way, it's not particularly that fancy or advanced. The eyes are melting the closer you go, the eyelashes are bad, you still can't do fingers, and even emotions, it doesn't seem to register them very well. Like, this distracted boyfriend, whatever this is, old meme thing, that's not the smouldering face, that's not like the face he pulls off. This is kind of like wimpy annoyed face. It's not the same emotion. Sure, when you're smiling or maybe making like a happy response, it can kind of do that, but when it comes to something that's a bit more nuanced, it loses its ability. Say for example backgrounds, it doesn't really know what it's doing with those. People in the background turn to melt, and other pieces of background don't make much sense, even though they have a reference. It's not perfect. It's the same as pretty much any of these other AI things. On the topic of stealing though, there was an AI whistleblower from OpenAI who came out last year to the New Yorker and said, yes, the company is stealing stuff. And the way they do it through the program, making videos.
Which is interesting, because I think if you were to ask ChatGPT, is OpenAI's AI learning or training practices ethical, I would assume it would say yes. I'm not sure if I actually asked it this before, but I think I've asked it to list examples of other AIs that have ethical training practices or something, because I do care about like kind of the morals and ethics of things. But like I used ChatGPT to make a Ghibli version of myself, or of a screenshot of me for a thumbnail for another video that I did before. And this is one of those things where it's like, is it becoming kind of a gray area? Because it's like, I could learn and practice a Studio Ghibli style by going and looking up clips on YouTube or watching the films themselves. Because right now the argument around AI and the learning and training of it off of other people's art and stuff, at the core of it, it does to some degree come down to cope, because the only reason, for the most part, why you would be mad at AI for doing this is because it has a likelihood of taking your job or other people's jobs that do a similar thing, because it could do it faster and cheaper, and it may be easier to work with an AI than certain artists, depending on how easy the artist is to work with or collaborate with. And it's not that the AI is necessarily perfect right now, but is it good enough to warrant its use for certain things of certain projects? And because it's that thing where it's like, if I were to learn Studio Ghibli style, the only thing is I don't know to what degree how copyright law would work around the style of something, like stealing somebody's style. I don't know if you can sue on based on that. I think you could sue for like IP theft of, like, if I took a character that they made and then I copied that and used it in my own creative work. Like, I would assume that would be a violation of copyright law or IP law or something like that. But if I made like my own character in the style of Studio Ghibli, where it just kind of had that similar kind of drawn effect or look to it, is that okay? I'm not a lawyer, so don't take this as legal advice. I'm just kind of like sort of asking questions or thinking here. But anyway.
Visual copies of stuff, putting them in the system, and in theory they're supposed to make some sort of... Yes, the company is stealing stuff, and these other AI things. On the topic of stealing though, there was an AI whistleblower from OpenAI who came out last year to the New Yorker and said, yes, the company is stealing stuff. And the way they do it through the program, making visual copies of stuff, putting them in the system, and in theory they're supposed to make some sort of new out of them, but that's not always the case of how it works. So it's all a bit dubious. And OpenAI is...
I can tell you, you will be seeing me use this moving forward. I loved using this. So then...
currently fighting many legal ramification lawsuits in the process of all this. But the real kicker that's probably started this, and maybe the reason that OpenAI even did this, if they were being really petty, is a classic clip of Hayao Miyazaki talking about his complete distaste for AI, but this was happening in 2016 when it was more of a speculative assumption that in 10 years this technology would exist. His first response to it being like, well, you won't need people then if you have this program, so I don't know why you're coming to me. But there's a classic little clip in here where he talks about it being an insult to life itself, which technically isn't about the program itself, it's more about what he's been showing on a projector, which is some sort of hypothetical. I don't know why they're showing him like a bad 3D model running against the floor. They've got such a terrible response that they probably should have just ended the pitch there. But when they did ask about the actual program of making your robots be able to draw, Miyazaki just responded with a quiet, dead stare, leading into him saying, which is pretty funny.
You got to respect. Like, I don't even really know much about this guy or what he's about, what his belief system is. I don't know much about him just in general. But like, you kind of got to generally, to some degree, respect like the older artists that are like pioneers or like a big deal in the space of art. Like, this guy is probably like kind of a household name, I assume. And there's something about like you could talk about like the stereotypes of artists maybe being a bit high and mighty, or maybe some of them might be stuck up, or maybe some of them might be full of themselves, or maybe some of them might be elitist, or whatever, like, you know, whatever the artist stereotypes are, and however often that might be true. But when somebody's got experience and is skilled at their craft and has just kind of, I don't know if he has like an old soul mentality, but I get the vibe that like people should probably listen to what he's saying and think about it and take it seriously, regardless of whether you think he's out of touch or not. Just the idea of like when he says like this is an insult to life itself and we won't need humans, and when he says like, even though it might sound kind of comical, but when he talks about this part here where he says I fear the world's end is near, like, just take a moment and really think about that. Like, what does that mean? And does that mean a literal, or is it more just like the death of... I think he probably means it more in a literal way, but maybe to some degree it's philosophical. Like the end of... I don't know if I want to say the end of meaning, but like specifically pertaining to art, like, is it the end of like the warmth of art and creativity? Because if it's all made by a machine, eventually in one day? Like, in the end, do we become useless? In the end, what do we do? Do we do anything? And kind of like art without the human hand or human touch to making the artwork. What does that world look like? Does that world feel good? Does that world feel better? Or does it feel cold, right? And robotic, kind of figuratively and literally, or metaphorically and literally. So yeah, like, just, think about what he's saying.
Which
Humans
is
have
pretty
lost
funny.
confidence.
Now, this documentary is from The Neverending Man, 2016, and it was sort of the behind-the-scenes production of Borrow the Caterpillar, which was Miyazaki's attempt at doing some CG 3D animation alongside 2D stuff and sort of merging those worlds. But I believe as this AI conversation, the way the documentary takes it is that he sees himself as running away from animation, and 2D animation specifically, which is where he's at. And that even if it's hard, even if it's laborious, even if it takes a lot of energy and difficulty, that's why it's worth it. As he reassesses his dedication to basically hand-drawn animation and then going on to start the production of The Boy and the Heron. And that in some part that, the artistic value in it is that it's not easy to make a film like this. It's actually really difficult and takes a lot of skill and time. Look, a machine that can pop out some vague assimilation of it in 3 minutes or less is not really giving the same effect.
Since Thursday, I have arrived here well.
At first, I was not allowed to write.
Now, that is a movie that is basically in the hands of creatives. It was not funded by a production committee, a big, important $1 million companies. It was all sort of funded in-house, which meant it could do things a little bit more unorthodox in terms of having a longer production and do things at their own pace, better working conditions. And that is not what OpenAI wants. My biggest concern about them is how they are using this tool. And there's more to this tool than just the Ghiblifying. There's a whole breakdown of what they would like to be able to do with this tool in terms of graphic design, small comics, illustrations, consistency with prompt add-ons. All these programs seem to be pushing themselves more into the sort of creative business sector and showing oh, look at the potential we have. If you buy our systems, you could use it to make graphic design without having to use people, besides maybe to clean up the mess in the end. Look, it can do type now, kind of, sometimes. Not that language, though. It's not looking encouraging for those industries. And even pitching what seems to be diagrams to government funding. Look, we could use it in schools, which I don't know if you should trust it to give the right information, since it tends to be wrong 50% of the time, but I digress. A lot of this is concerning for the creative workforce and how it deteriorates the worth and value of their work, as well as the worst possible case scenario being that they end up downsizing their entire creative department to the people who clean up the slop and make it feasible to show to people. And how effective that pitch is going to be in terms of actually working out, I don't know. I mean, it seems that they've already ran into problems with this Ghibli filter in terms of I had heard that effectively a lot of people, especially on the free service, were being told that they can't make Ghiblifying images anymore because it breaks their content rules. Some people seem to still be able to do it. I don't know if it's just the paid ones, but I tried it myself. I gave an example here. I was like, oh, okay, I'll give this picture of ocean mad drip, tell it to Ghiblify it and see if it does it. And it did not. It told me no twice. So I don't know if there was behind the scenes conversation or things have gotten a bit too hot, but it doesn't seem consistent, this system.
I don't know.
Now, there are also some complications that come with such a system. So this borderline filter seems to have kind of blown out OpenAI's GPUs. They said melting. That might be a joke. So they had to very quickly limit the amount of people being able to use it, which to me makes me wonder how effective these programs are to begin with.
AI CEO claims ChatGPT is burning through a fortune because of Ghibli trend. Yeah, I heard something about how people saying please and thank you is costing them millions. I don't know if that's true. I think I just heard something like that somewhere. I assume it's just because if somebody says thank you, that's an extra prompt that the AI then responds to, so that's an extra generation. And then the please part, I'm not sure exactly, because if that please is part of the prompt, I don't know if that would add to it substantially. I'm not sure how that all is, but anyway.
If it takes so much to do so little. Not to mention, there's also the problem of inbreeding AI, which has been something that's
dear.
been talked about quite a lot in the last year, in that like you can't differentiate the difference between a real image and an AI image. So
Oh, I talked about this before. I think that's I couldn't find. I had trouble finding the original video that I first saw this concept talked about in. If I'm assuming it's the same concept that I think this guy's talking about right now, where it's essentially that what happens when the AI image generation, when that AI learns off of images that are generated by an AI, and I think he's talking about how it doesn't know how to differentiate. So then it's like this, I don't know if you'd call it a regressive loop, where the AI generation ability gets worse over time because it's now learning off of not just real images but also the AI images. So just like the reference, like it just gets worse. Is that what he's talking about?
the AI images go back into the system, and the results they get in the end become worse and worse and worse, and they become more homogenized and broken. Now, will this be a problem for other? Probably not. Eventually, they may be able to figure a way out telling the system like what is AI and what is not. Although how long that's going to take, nobody knows. And by the time they figure it out, all that speculative investor money might be gone. In the words of Miyazaki,
So this is interesting. The web is becoming increasingly a dangerous place to look for your data.
by the time they figure it out, all that speculative investor money might be gone. In the words of Miyazaki, maybe AI was a mistake. It kind of feels like we're dealing with snake oil salesmen in some way. They have big aspirations, but can they make it work? I don't know. And there's still some of this in the rest of the anime industry as well, unfortunately. So for example, YouTuber Dong Chang. He has been pretty well known in the sort of anime art sort of newbie area as doing tutorials and how you can do certain things, you know, how you make a layout in anime. This is the program they use in anime. This is how you do this. This is how you do this. Stuff that's pretty helpful for young animators. But also now he is basically peddling some sort of weird AI in between cleanup coloring device that's only on his website. There's not a lot of details about it, but I think the audience was very mixed on the response, because the top comment is still an in-betweener saying this kind of device will destroy the industry that's already struggling when it comes to in-betweeners. And these programs do exist in the industry. It's not like this is the first time they have. His is supposed to be more advanced, quote. I don't really understand if it is. It's apparently some people in the comments are saying that you have to pay $2 per in-between. So I don't even see how, like, who's going to be using this? Like, it seems like they're trying to peddle it to studios, but the output it gives, it's not very good. Like the in-betweens, the final animation that it's throwing out, very janky. Yes, these programs they could get better, but if they did, then effectively, well, you're out of the business, aren't you? Because as soon as they get good enough to make competent in-betweens, they don't need key animators anymore.
So this is one thing I will say is that, because a lot of the argument around this, like pertaining to the argument against AI, to some degree, if we're honest, is simply coping with the potential impending doom to certain jobs in the sector. Because a lot of the counter argument is just based around purely ethics, in the sense of, well, if this gets good, it takes these people's jobs. To which the answer might just simply be yes. You know what I mean? Like, because people present this argument as if it is therefore justification to not do it, but it's kind of, is that similar to the guy that works on the horseshoes for the horses, saying, well, you can't make automobiles because then my job goes away? To which the answer is yes. You know what I mean? So it's like, this is different industries, but is that a similar example or type of example? Because yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, it might be rough out there pretty soon for some of these people, whether it's like what he described as the in-betweeners or whatever else. But it's one of those things where like the technological innovation or advancement may possibly be inevitable, and so fighting against the development of AI technologies that might replace jobs might be not a fight that people can win, but maybe the better goal would be to adapt. But that could be easier said than done.
That's just the facts of it. And I don't know if they'll ever technically get to that point. Like these programs, if they are used, the biggest problem is that it's an art, not a science. Spacing, even when you give them a chart or whatever he's saying you can do, You're not going to get a perfect result because
Hey, my English not so good.
Do you mean
so
my
good.
English isn't very good?
Yes, I am sorry.
Slightly
How
uncanny
often
valley.
do you practice speaking?
I have
you may have a different preference of what you want. And when it comes to more complicated moves, it's not really going to be able to simulate the animation properly. Because maybe it can do just fine with, like, I don't know, a head turn when it's got the frames, or walking down a road really still. But when it comes to more complicated things like dancing or fight scenes, it's going to give some really weird results. And it's going to effectively mean that there's just going to be a hell of a lot of more work for the people next up the cubicle, in terms of people like the animation directors who may have to look at this and go, this is just complete dog, I need to redraw the whole thing, which is just more work for them. In the end, the result you're going to get is going to be pretty limited and bad, a cleanup of a terrible AI image.
That's if the AI doesn't continue to advance to a better place. So for example, if that regressive loop of AI learning from AI and getting worse over time, if that happens, then maybe this will be kind of like the .com bubble or whatever. I don't know if I'm referencing that bit of history correctly, but it might be that kind of like an AI bubble that will pop once people realize that maybe the technology isn't worth it or as good as they thought and worth investing in to the level to which they thought it was worth investing in. And then as a result, if the thing craps out, it craps out. That's the gist of it, right? And so then if it goes that way, then all these guys' jobs might be safe. But if it actually does get better and improve and they figure out how to work out the kinks, and if it ends up just being simply as good as a human, then it goes a different route, right?
And when we see people pitching this idea, like a certain anime AI movie, which is supposedly allegedly 95% AI generated, like their version of the AI, in terms of taking the frames and then sort of filling them in, creates a lot of really weird problems, which is going to take ages for a real animator to clean up. And the results, again, at the end, don't look very good because the spacing is weird. And spacing is hard, even for real people. It's so difficult. Like, I'm not going to pretend I'm any good at it. Like, I once upon a time did try and do a Ghibli animation in the style of Ghibli. I did it on the pencils. I did some backgrounds for it. I gave it a go. I don't know if it worked 100%. I don't know if it really has the vibe 100 there. But it's a learning process. It's something you can build on. And in theory, when it comes to the anime industry, that's the goal. You can't just get rid of in-betweeners. This is the core, well, ideal.
So this idea of can't, it's hopeful. I'm going to kind of go the Asmongold route here, where it's like some people might just say it is inevitable if these tools develop continually and improve, right? But like their only hope for maintaining their jobs, probably for the most part, like maintaining the in-betweener jobs, is if AI does not become good enough. At the point that it becomes good enough, is it fair to say that it is inevitable that those jobs will disappear?
Really, this is the cornerstone of which you teach the next generation. This is where you're supposed to start in the animation field. You learn from masters, you learn from like your tutors, and they teach you the ways, and you learn tricks and trades, and you learn how to animate properly, and then you move up the scale, and then new Dogen people come in, and that kind of vibe. That's what's supposed to happen, ideally. Maybe some people will stay, depending on their income, which usually isn't very good, which, look, the industry when it comes to in-betweeners is in a complete nightmare state, but this is only...
I'm not too surprised to hear that, because I think any kind of artist job that ends up kind of being summarized as cleanup or QA, like if you think of QA from the video game industry, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't quality assurance usually the people that kind of get crapped on? Like, that doesn't necessarily always happen, but aren't they the ones that kind of get like, they're the one left kind of getting the blame or whatever? Like, didn't that happen with Cyberpunk, that it was like not necessarily overt blame, but kind of like, oh, I guess our QA team didn't catch that or whatever? Like, it was kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, I might be misremembering some of the details here, but didn't that kind of happen? Anyway, so it's like whenever it's jobs that are kind of not necessarily obvious, but they might do a lot of heavy lifting on the back end, just in terms of time and kind of meticulous attention to detail, filling in the gaps, cleaning up stuff, it might be fair that they might not be given maybe the the level of appreciation that maybe they deserve, kind of thing. It's possible. I haven't been in this industry. It's not my wheelhouse, so I'm not an expert.
Only going to topple it ever further. And that's
I'm actually not really super educated on this at all.
come in, and that kind of vibe, that's what's supposed to happen ideally. Maybe some people will stay depending on their income, which usually isn't very good, which, look, the industry when it comes to in-betweeners is in a complete nightmare state, but this is only going to topple it. Ever further. And that's not to say there can't be some kind of program in the middle here. I mean, there are things that do like micro tweening. Usually you can do that on like Adobe Animate or whatever, where, you know, you turn the line work into a shape and you can transition each shape into each other. And people like Yuasa quite like that. They add that to their sort of key animation in-betweens. It's something that enhances, or quote enhances it. It depends if you like that style. I'm not massive on the sort of more like waviness, but there are definitely utilities for it, and I can see why someone might want to do something like that. And look, yeah, like I said, the in-between industry is not in a good place, and it hasn't been for a long time. There were jokes 20 years ago in animation running Kuromi that all the in-betweeners in a lot of the departments and different studios in Japan had quit because, you know, it's too much work, the pay's really bad, and they'd all been moved and outsourced overseas. In fact, Ghibli is probably one of the few places when it was operational where you would find in-betweeners in-house doing most of the work, or at the very least keeping all the in-betweening within, you know, the Tokyo space. Because in Ghibli, the ideal of it was that those in-betweeners were taught by one of the veterans like Kondo, and they worked their way up the ladder if they wanted to. Say, for example, someone like Yanabayashi. Yanabayashi ended up starting as an in-betweener, working on lots of little projects there, moving to being a key animator by Spirited Away, eventually became a animation supervisor director, as they call them in Ghibli, and eventually a director at the studio with Ariete, because Suzuki said, quote, he's basically our best animator. And that wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have that system in mind.
You gotta appreciate the discipline that is hand-drawn animation, kind of broadly speaking, because it's kind of a thing that to a large degree, other than probably anime, but even then I don't know how much, like, I don't know to what level it's hand drawn anymore. It's probably, I assume, largely digital, even just like with the drawing pens and things like that, like how much of it is actually like pencil to paper anymore, right? Like in terms of that always being the main, you know, way of doing it, like how much of it is at least mostly digitized. And so just the whole craft, like it's just kind of a, is it fair to say it's like a dying art, you know?
And hell, I've actually talked to a different in-betweener who spent some time at Ghibli. He effectively told me that he learnt more at Ghibli, working there for about a year or so, than he did at one of France's most prestigious animation colleges for 3 years. Even if this program gets better and they can learn more at Ghibli, working there for about a year or so than he did at one of France's most prestigious animation colleges for 3 years.
Wow.
Even if this program gets better and they can spit out backgrounds that are effective and good enough in terms of all these processes, you are going to be losing something in the process, because it's not just enough to have some sort of homogenized prompt-based system. You know, you want something from France? Well, here you go. That system's going to give you what it thinks generally people see as France, what images it's found that look like France. There's an importance in going and scouting these places, taking photos yourself, doing research, thinking about what the intent is, what color palettes you want, how you want things to look, what sort of vibe you're looking for, like going through the history books. Figure out the world you're creating instead of letting some sort of automated system give you something that's, okay, looks all right.
Yeah, there might be a lack of nuanced detail, because at least until it gets really advanced in terms of the ability to influence the AI technology. Like, for example, if it gets to the point kind of where you get it to paint the canvas, and then you kind of get your brush and you kind of push it around a bit. Like, you're like, okay, because like to a degree this already kind of exists, like with Photoshop AI and stuff like that, but it's like where you could kind of be like, yo, this one window, split it into 3 panels, make one of them blue and the rest green. Like, you know, until it gets so fine-tuned that you could literally tweak everything on the fly instantaneously and have like an insane level of creative control. So who knows how far off that is. But anyway, until it gets to that point, is it fair to say that it might just kind of be, everything might kind of just feel a little bit the same or kind of generic? Is that like, because that might be kind of the vibe I get from what he's saying, where it's like, this artwork, when it's just like generate me a, you know, France landscape, it might just be like kind of generic France, as opposed to, oh, in this one they hand drew a little apple cart in the background and the guy has a face that looks kind of funny and he's holding this this lollipop and an ice cream cone, and he has a dog that looks kind of like a fox. Like, you know, like these little things that like AI's probably not going to just do that. You're going to have to, like, that's more of the human touch and really specific detail. And in terms of originality and stuff. So, like, am I understanding what he's saying correctly?
And on that process involves a lot of collaboration and refining and debates with different creators, but will make something that's more of a sum of its parts, a more defined project. And you're removing that all when you create an automated system that can do it in a couple minutes while destroying half the ocean. This whole thing just...
Wait.
System that can do it in a couple minutes while destroying half the ocean.
Google turns to nuclear power AI data centers. So I'm going to right off the bat quickly probably disagree with this implication here, which is the idea of nuclear power destroying the oceans. I'm not an expert on nuclear energy, so I could be wrong and out to lunch on this one. But as far as I understand, as long as you don't have a plant meltdown, it should be pretty chill. Not literally chill, because it gets pretty hot, and as far as I understand, you need the water to cool it down. But as long as the plant doesn't melt down or have any issues, and everything runs properly, isn't nuclear power one of the cleanest forms of energy? Now, I know people talk about nuclear waste and stuff like that, but I think that, like, there's this video on YouTube that talks about how there was a system developed in the 50s or the 60s that was a type of nuclear plant that works based off of recycling nuclear waste, and so it decreases the half-life from like 1,000 or 100,000 or however many thousands of years down to like 100 years or 200 years or something like that. So it makes it way more viable as a resource, because it greatly shortens the half-life decomposition, or whatever you call it. So I think that this is a bit of a debatable topic, but anyway.
This whole thing just seems a little ludicrous to me. I mean, I'm going back to Mr. Starvey here and his perspective on AI within the arts.
How did fucking computers become the thing and machines became the thing that does art, and humans are the ones in fucking Amazon warehouses? Like, shouldn't the robots be working so we could paint?
And I think a lot of times...
Kind of hard to argue with that just on surface level, because most people probably are like, wait a minute. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, yeah, this kind of doesn't make sense or whatever, you know?
People who are very pro-AI...
Robots be working so we could paint?
And I think a lot of times people who are very pro-AI kind of see people who have their problems with it, you know, even if it's more about the technical side or the loss in wages, and go, oh, you know, Luddite, you know, you don't like technology, yada, yada, yada. Well, that's not really the case here. I feel like there's a lot of different technologies that can be used and can be effective for animation going forward, which also have more practicality than a system that barely works. You know, look at things like Blender. Blender has always been improving. It's free. It's for everyone. It just won an Oscar. Like, that's crazy. But like, there are programs in there. You know, there are 3D models you can draw on. There's the grease pencil, and all this other stuff that keeps building. And you can use, you know, you can use 3D models to do in-betweens. You know, it kind of can automate the process if we really want to. Now, it's a lot of extra work, I suppose, so it really depends on how dedicated you are to that. But I've seen people do pretty effective work with it. Looking at here, or even someone like Worthy Kids, who has absolutely mastered the precision between 3D and 2D. Like this kind of animation here, Wizard Beer, that stuff is amazing. I don't know how he did that. It took me a while to even realize that most of those models were 3D. Outside of the parts were a little bit more complicated that are drawn.
I think there was a fighting game that did a similar thing where it was, I don't remember, it was like an anime style fighting game, but apparently, I think it had like this style that looked like hand-drawn anime, but I think all the character models were 3D. But just the way that it did it, with whether it was the cell shading or whatever, it was like, you could tell, I think, vaguely that there was some element of 3D to it, but it made you kind of like have to kind of look at it, analyze it, and I don't know if you kind of had to second guess it or not, but anyway. So it's like, it's interesting. It's interesting to even see this now, but what I will say is, as well as this guy, this is just the off the top kind of response to what he's saying about how, like, to his credit, he's not against newer forms of technology or advancements in technology, but to put it bluntly, for all the people that are not artistically inclined that way, this requires work, right? What people, I think, probably part of the big appeal to the AI side of it is that it requires very little work and really just the idea, and then the AI does all or most of the work for you, and that would be the main appeal. But what he's talking about is just creative tools that help or expedite the process, but that still require a reasonable level of effort to put into practice. Like, you're gonna have to learn Blender, you're gonna have to like make the 3D models, or kind of still do the animating work, keyframe, etc., right? Whereas somebody's just like, man, I don't know how to do that, I just want generate it. So it's like he's kind of maybe playing a bit more towards the middle of the argument rather than just going like completely one side or the other with it. But I think he's still definitely more like, obviously, on like the kind of pro artist, pro more traditional way of like doing it by actually doing it, rather than just having like an automation via robotics or artificial intelligence of the process.
On in. But it's just that sort of marriage between the two. What about Moho Studios? That tool effectively lets you use vectorization to take a piece of art or drawing and put it through the system and vectorize it and make a version of it there, and you can move it on its own and adjust it and do things with it and sort of build it.
For efficiency's sake, that's kind of cool.
Without necessarily having to draw every frame.
So it's like kind of like so it's like a 2D version of Bones in like 3ds Max or like Maya or something. I assume that Maya is Bones. And so then I guess you probably tweak the level of how much it molds or is manipulated by the bones. That is a pretty good in-between tool, and is vector-based, so I assume, because vector-based, one of the things about vectors, I think, is that they're infinitely scalable, whereas if it's raster-based, raster, I think, basically means that it's based off of pixels rather than math. Math being that, the vector is here to here in a math calculation versus like raster would be like the image is here to here in this many pixels, and so if you blow up those pixels, it look super pixelated, right? Like the resolution's not going to be looking so great if you blow it up. That's like me giving my semi-brief description based off of what I hopefully am getting correct from what I learned in college. Anyway.
And this is a program that has been used by Cartoon Saloon for years, and it's really effective, I suppose, for like big mechanical things that are actually quite hard to draw into perspective, and it's probably a little bit more efficient than using a 3D model for them.
Yeah,
but that stuff has a lot of potential to go forward, a lot of very useful features, and can be used in harmony with 2D animation. And look, if we're talking about Studio Ghibli, we should stop complaining about this, and we should have a look into Cocoon, which is not fully out yet, but had a preview recently on NHK. This comes from one of the minds of Studio Ghibli for maybe 20 years. They retired a while back, but they were effectively in charge of the in-between department and cleanup and everything else. And they created their own studio, and through NHK, it seems basically just NHK, they have made this 1-hour animation very much in the Ghibli style, but it's a beautiful little film they made, and no AI needed. It could have been done without it. And speaking of other beautiful Ghibli-esque movies, what about Nasu and Summer of Andalusia? Use my code StephenNasu on AnimeAgo's site to get 20% off. It's a lot better than whatever fucking AI trash you're going to see on the internet. Oh yeah, and I've made a lot of videos about Ghibli in the past, their history, the drama, and a lot of interesting stories that don't often get told within this playlist. So if you want to hear about Ghibli and Ghibli's past and future, check those out. And I got to shout out my patrons. Big thank you to Lenny, Tim J. Richards, Chunks, Fox Mulder, OT, Paul, Seth, Oscar Burden. Thank you for keeping the freak going. Paul, Mataisu, Axel, Sat. You're great, especially as well as the $5 patrons here. Thank you for keeping the freak going and giving all the support you can. We'll be back to Oshi next time.
All right. So, what'd you guys think of that? Some of the points raised, like from an artist perspective, he probably sounds fairly reasonable. There's probably some pretty solid arguments here. And the only thing that I will say is that he comes off as sounding a little bit angry or miffed, which, if he is, then that could be fair enough, because if you've spent a good portion of your life kind of getting good at a given skill or craft, and now AI is threatening to kind of just rug sweep you or rug pull you or whatever, and take your job, you might get a little bit defensive. Unless you kind of get ahead of it, and manage to learn the tool and master it, and then kind of, beat out the rest of the competition that doesn't have the AI and your knowledge of art or style or whatever, right? So is it fair to say that the artists with the tools will always beat the people with the tools who are not artists? Is that fair to say? If they have the same kind of tools. Yeah, no, it's a time where there's a little bit of unpredictability. Some people may potentially be hedging their bets on which way it's going to go, because it all kind of depends on whether AI advances as far as people might think it is. Like, is it really going to become, like, if we get artificial general intelligence or whatever other version of intelligence that is like infinitely, or not infinitely, but like if the intelligence curve goes up exponentially and it becomes like smarter than humans or whatever, like, this might be getting into more of like a theory. I'm not an expert on any of this, but it's like, if we get really crazy smart AI that can go and understand all these things and work out the kinks and stuff, then it might be game over for at least certain kinds of artist jobs. Whether it's the end of all artist jobs, you could debate that, because it's like we're in this murky gray area where you don't necessarily know which way it's going to go. A lot of it might be guesswork in theory in terms of actual practical application. It may remain to be seen what actually happens. But regardless, maybe proceed with caution and be prepared. Maybe. But, time will tell, maybe. But it's probably important that we don't let this get us down too much, because it could go a different way than you think it might go. Like, is it possible that it could work out and that it actually could be relatively